Here are 5 easy ways that you can radically improve your rhythm guitar playing. And first, let's just stop doing the same thing over and over and over again. Let's do something. Specifically, let's take one thing at a time. First off, remember, don't keep strumming the same strum the whole song. Sure, you're changing chords, but you can't keep this arm doing exactly the same thing for every measure. And it's not that hard to do. You've got to train your hand to know what are the downs, what are the ups, and just decide at any moment when the pick hits the strings and when it doesn't hit the strings, right? So if I have an A, if I have this, maybe that's a basic groove, but it doesn't mean I have to hit that rhythm every time. Sometimes just lay up a bit. Let the pick miss the strings. You'll notice that my arm is still doing its swings. It knows where the beat is at all times because it never really stops, even when I'm not playing right now. That's how we never lose our place, because I can always remove a lot of strums or gradually add a lot of strums depending on the part of the song, right? I can leave this going or I can fill it out or empty it again, right? As long as he's moving at the tempo that he needs to move. And further to that, we've got to change the rhythm with other techniques. For example, we could use anticipation. Now, this is if it works for the song, but it'll work for a lot of songs. And that is that the chord change doesn't always have to be right on beat 1. It could be before. That's a very AC/DC thing to do. Now, if you're playing a cover song and it doesn't have that, you wouldn't want to do it. But if you're jamming with your buddies, for sure, that anticipation is going to sound really good. So what is anticipation? It just means that you're playing the chord, the new chord, like a half a beat early. And sometimes you will do that with an upstroke because theoretically that would be an upstroke, right? But sometimes it still sounds better with a downstroke. So we will sometimes break the rule that I just said. I know, I admit it, it's rock and roll. How about you let some of the strums ring out and some of them you hit staccato, right? You block it really quickly here, and you can also let go here. If it's a bar chord, you can do staccato mostly there. But if it's an open chord like this one, you've got to do it here with the right hand. Combining these two things by letting some of the strums ring out and stopping some of the strums staccato creates a really interesting groove. And we can change it up at any moment in the song once we've practiced the concept. Similar to staccato, you could do a scratch strum at any moment. Just change one of the beats so that you're not hitting the actual chord, you're just hitting some scratchy sound. Sometimes, again with bar chords, you can just release the pressure of your left hand. Or if you're not using a bar chord, you got to do this more difficult technique, which is pushing against the strings here with your palm and then scratching through it. The mistake that most students make with that is they think that they got to scratch through all 6 strings. But in fact, you don't really have time usually. All you need is some kind of click percussive sound. And so often, just 3, maybe 4 strings, sometimes less, is really all you need. So with those things, your rhythm is going to change a lot throughout a song and keep it very interesting. But there's so many more things that we could do, like just play the chords in a different location. Just because the song says A for 4 bars doesn't mean you got to play A right here for 4 bars. It means you could play A here, or you could play A here, or you could play A here, or wherever that you happen to know A. Especially if you've got 4 bars of A, that's a long time to just stay on one chord. But lots of songs are like that. You could even just use open A and then bar chord A in its simplest form, right? But over time, like we have on our Patreon, you can learn these more cool chord shapes that move up the fretboard using triads and sometimes open strings along with the triads. I will say that does take a lot more work to learn these chord shapes, but they're all connected to everything that we need to know anyway. So they're all triads connected to bar chords, connected to scale shapes. Everything is connected. So when you learn one thing, over time you start to see, oh, if I have this, it's from the bar chord and it's from that pentatonic shape. So it's really worth the effort. Now we've got rhythmic changes, we've got the A in a different place. If we've got a lot of A, we can play A here, and A here. What else can we do? We don't always have to strum as a rhythm guitar player. We can also pick out individual notes, meaning like we can arpeggiate. So if I have this chord, I could strum it once and then arpeggiate. Arpeggiate just means picking out the notes of a chord in succession. So in its simplest form, it could just be. But in a more interesting way, maybe we mix up the order of the chord. That's just strum like that. Again, we've got to feel the rhythm, and when we're doing these arpeggios, the down-ups of our strumming hand might have to change to something more convenient for the arpeggio that you're playing. So yeah, it's a lot more difficult, but as long as we keep in mind we're feeling that rhythm, we know where beat 1 is, we're not going to get lost, right? We could do it on any of these A chords. We could change the direction of the arpeggio. We could make it real simple. We could just go, that's just up, strum all the notes in the order of that chord. With this technique, you're not always thinking exactly what arpeggio you're going to play. You know the chord, you're holding the chord, and then you just use your pick to grab any of those strings in almost any order. It doesn't really matter. Here's this A. Could be that. Depends on the tempo, depends on the song. It's really about connecting those arpeggios with the general groove of the song. Perhaps one of the easiest things we can do to change up our rhythm guitar playing is to actually not strum a moment and just hit the bass note of whatever chord you're on. A, don't start with the strum, start with the bass note instead. It's especially good on a chord change or at the beginning of a next bar. So if I'm on A, here comes bass, right? Also, the really cool thing about it is it actually gives you time to get to the next chord. Now I know this is A to A, but I'm shifting up quite a ways, so I've got this open A here. That is very handy. It actually gives me a quarter note, a moment to get to that next chord. So here's the open A. Talk about that in a sec. You see that I went to the bass there, and then I went to the chord. I kind of like to be lazy sometimes, especially if it means that it sounds really good. Is it lazy? I don't know. I just like the sound of it, I think. So just remember, whatever song you're playing, you don't have to strum beat 1 of everything. Just hit the bass note. And if the song says A, it doesn't mean you have to play exactly A. I'm not saying you can just make up whatever chord you want, but you can add extensions to chords at any moment, as long as you know what extensions can be added. So in this case, we just have A chords all over the place. I could have made them A sus4s. That's just moving the major third of the chord up a half step, so that becomes the 4th. sus4 we call it. It has that kind of suspended sound. It wants to resolve back to A. Or I could do A sus2, would be a similar one, right? This is a different sound. That's instead of having the third, it goes down to the 2. So I have that B note. We gotta get good at finding these chords where we like them. So I love this A chord here because I get the open string, but I get these higher notes up here. And so since I also love the sus4 sound, I gotta make sure I know how to turn it in to sus4. Same up here. This one's actually quite tricky. It's a little hard to get the pinky around there, but boy is it worth it because it sounds really cool. Now, there are lots of extensions you could add. You just gotta make sure it belongs to the chord of the key of that moment, or that it just fits that song. So that's a giant topic. Let's do one last thing. In this jam track, what I did is I went A and then D/A. So I am changing chords here actually. I've made it a little more interesting. You guys know I love my Keith Richards, and that's basically the Keith Richards, right? It's almost an A sus4 chord though. It's so funny because a D chord is almost the same as an A sus4 because the 4 of A sus4 is a D. It's very cool. That's why these kind of harmonies can be kind of flexible. That's very Keith Richards to play around with that. Is that an A sus4? Yeah. This would be a D/A. What about this one? That's an A sus4, but this would be a D/A. Very similar, right? Again, just get to know these chord shapes. We're gonna have these chord shapes on our Patreon this week, by the way. D/A, right? That one's A sus4. Couldn't help myself. That's the D/A. A sus4 or D/A. They're so similar. They're almost interchangeable, but I will say when you really go to the D/A, that's a chord change, right? Let's see. We can put all these things together. What were they? They were change up your rhythm, stop playing the same rhythm over and over and over again. You can do more. You want to change it throughout the song. You want to keep your audience interested in what you're playing. We've got change your rhythm by adding anticipation, staccato, and sometimes let chords ring, sometimes add scratch. Make it interesting throughout. Now we've got play chords in different locations. We certainly did that. That's a lot of memorization, but you can do it. It's well worth it. And we've got sometimes hit the bass note only, especially when you have a big movement to make, and especially when the bass note is an open string, as it is in this case. That's very handy. And then what did we do? We had arpeggiate the chord. We don't always have to strum through every beat. Some beats could be strummed, some beats could be arpeggiated. Combining even just those two things alone has radically improved your guitar playing, seriously. And then think about extensions every now and then, if it's right for the song. The easiest ones are just sus4. You can throw sus4 on that home 1 chord of A, or whatever key you're in. It sounds fantastic. So let's put all this together. The tabs for this are on our Patreon. Let's hear it. I've got my new book that just came out. It's called Fretboard Fundamentals. If you want to stop getting lost on the fretboard, this one's for you. And actually, this video right here. My name is Blue Morris, and I teach guitar lessons right here in Vancouver and on YouTube and Patreon. I'll see you there.